one of the reasons I was attracted to Xavier is the history and the success of our 2 basketball programs, but yet haven't gotten to that 3rd weekend, and so, to help get Xavier to a Final Four and a national championship in those 2 flagship sports, I think helps drive everybody in this department.
This is the Sean Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing. Now, here's your hosts, Paul Fritschner and Adam Baum, with the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Sean Miller.
Welcome into another episode of the Sean Miller Podcast. Paul Fritschner today is just myself today. No Adam Baum. He is on vacation today. He's out for the weekend, so it's just myself. He'll be back with us soon here on the Sean Miller Podcast. But to my right, it is a very special guest this afternoon. We're going to introduce him in just a second. But first, we want to make sure that we tell you all that we are presented by Deer Park Roofing and the official payroll sponsor of the Sean Miller Podcast, payroll sponsor. So to my right, it is Greg Christopher, Vice President here at Xavier University and also the Director of Athletics. Great to be here with you, Greg. Wanted to come on and bring you on to the Sean Miller Podcast. Your Sean Miller Podcast debut here today.
Episode 41, you said, yeah.
That's right.
Now, how'd Adam get the day on the golf course and you didn't?
Well, so for people that have listened to the show, you know that I've had to miss some time here over the last few months. So we kind of figured that as we get into the later part of the summer, we tag team this, and Adam had a little time off. So Adam's
well
down
deserved.
And anybody that knows Adam knows he won't miss a day on the golf course.
No, he won't.
He will not be cheated there. But Greg, we wanted to bring you on today to kind of really do like a State of the Union for Xavier Athletics and where Xavier is positioned right now, both within the conference, within college athletics in general. But first, before we do that, I want to take a step back and look at last year, because I think for people that might just watch the men's basketball team here at Xavier, you might not realize how successful this athletic department is as a whole and how many championships these other teams win, the Olympic sports, the incredibly successful programs here at Xavier. I think this is a great opportunity to really highlight a lot of that success that they had last school year. Absolutely,
Paul, and appreciate the opportunity to do that kind of state of the state, so to speak. Often do it each summer with a letter, and as we started forming that this year to our fans, realized this might be a better platform to do that. So again, appreciate the opportunity. But 2 years ago, we had I think Tom Miser pulled this together, the most successful competitive year in kind of Xavier Athletics history, cutting across all the sports. And last fall started off on a great note as well. Christy had a great fall in volleyball, and then both soccer teams made it to the NCAA Tournament. John was able to win the Big East Championship. So a year ago, we got off to just an equally impressive start in the fall, and so it was fun, a fun start, so to speak.
Yeah, and you just think about the fall and the success, and the women's soccer team getting back to the NCAA tournament, and what Coach Nate Lee, who has since left the program, but what he had been able to do to build all that up. It's really incredible to see, here at Xavier with what you have in this program and what you've built up, all of these coaches. It feels like there's sustained success there.
I often say, we've got, I think it's 13 head coaches because we've got a couple of dual sport programs, but the reality is those are the 13 most important people in the department. Yeah. They are. Those head coaches have more influence over the experience and success of our student athletes than anybody else. It's up to the rest of us to support them, and we do have a great group of head coaches.
So as you transition into the winter, I think, as I had mentioned before, anybody listening to this knows that the basketball programs had suffered some pretty significant injuries last year, and there were some setbacks. Both teams didn't perform up to the standards I think those coaches would say that they would have liked to have performed at, but there's a lot of optimism going into both basketball seasons this year.
No doubt about that, Paul, and as far as the forward facing, but yeah, it's also no doubt that last winter was a little choppy. You had a great fall with the fall sports, then you get into basketball season, and different stories, but some common threads.
Yeah.
And you mentioned injuries as one. Both teams had injuries they didn't expect. And then the other thing is both teams were really young,
Yeah.
almost unexpectedly young in different ways, and those contributed to their seasons. Look, there's a reason Billy was here last year. She took over a program that wasn't very good, and then they struggled, and some of that. It was injuries, being young, but also it was building a culture that wasn't where she wanted it to be, and I think she's got that in place now. Sean's story was a little different. I mean, they weren't chopped liver. I mean, they were still, had their ups, but then also had their choppiness. I mean, what happened in July with Zach and Jerome really set the tone then for the rest of the season. And we got through that, and as you pointed out, both teams are headed in the right direction now.
So then you get out of the winter, weather starts to warm up a little bit, you get into the spring, and the success for baseball, for tennis, I mean, it picks up right where it left off. Yeah,
like the fall, we had a really nice spring. Billy, you mentioned, had a great season, and unfortunately was just on the wrong side of the bubble there. But he does such a terrific job with his program. And then Bree and Doug just keep marching along with success in the Big East, both winning Big East championships and making it to their NCAA tournaments.
Yeah, I think, again, you talk about golf, you talk about tennis, you talk about all these sports, and it's just really cool to sit here and think about, where Xavier was 10, 11 years ago joining the Big East, and now here they are going into 2024, 2025, and it's just, well, this program's building off an NCAA tournament. This program's building off a tournament. Billy O'Connor with the baseball, it feels like they have come to expect making the NCAA tournament. All these teams, it's just a cool atmosphere to be around.
Don't want to take it for granted because it's a lot. It's really hard work, and as our coaches will say and our student athletes will say. But there's no doubt. I think you're right because, as you pointed out, Paul. I mean, I arrived right as we were joining the Big East, and as much as there was excitement at that time, there was also this. Are we ready?
Yeah.
And I'm not sure you ever get all 19 sports rowing in the same direction at the same time. But we've held our own. We absolutely have held our own in the Big East.
So summer's usually a little bit quieter around Cintas. You have your summer camps, things like that keep the building with some life in it. But this year, there's been a little bit more to it around Cintas.
You're right, and it's over your left shoulder there, the kind of the last phase of the work within the arena. With the center court club and the deck that's being built in I guess that's the northeast corner, and that's coming down the home stretch, hopefully done by no later than October 1st, but we're excited about that. Not saying that Cintas is done at that point with the $30 million or so of work that's been done over the last, say, 7 years. But you can probably take a deep breath on what I would call major work in the building for the next couple of years.
For fans that may not know as much about the Center Court Club, I know that, as you said, is a major part of what will look different for the fan experience this coming November when they come back to Cintas for basketball season. Can you talk a little bit more about what that will look like and what has gone into that?
Sure. I think a lot of fans are familiar with the Joseph Club and the amenities there. And really what we've heard over the last, say, 5+ years has been, bottom line is it's fewer suites and the creation of this Center Court Club. Because at the end of the day, I think fan tastes have changed with time. And so what we heard was, I want a suite experience, but I don't necessarily need those 14 or 16 seats. So create the club, seats sold quickly, so it'll be full. And then this deck in the corner is essentially kind of another Norwood Cafe or D'Artagnan's deck, but now it's on concourse level. And both areas are sponsored or named, so to speak, and those announcements will be coming in the next month or so. So we're pleased with that, and especially the deck. I think the dynamic on the concourse level, you come down the big stairs, through the Schiff entrance, and you turn left, you will now be able to see right into the arena. So I think the effect it's going to have on the concourse in the arena for the fans will be great.
Especially now, and it feels like more modern arenas and stadiums and everything. They have that standing room, the ability to mingle around. It just live sports are changing, right? You got to be able to adapt to that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Shifting gears a little bit from all of those updates to where we are here, and especially on the Sean Miller podcast. Recently, we've seen Trayvon Blewett have his jersey retired. On the men's side, we've had Amber Harris, Tashia Phillips on the women's side have their jerseys retired. I think that appreciation of history here for Xavier basketball is very important. It's something that Sean Miller has talked a lot about and emphasizing in his return, is appreciating the past and appreciating the history of these programs. But jersey retirement, especially for fans, it allows you to bring up some of those old memories. How exciting is it for you to see a lot of these old faces to come back and to be able to announce more of these jersey retirements?
So that's terrific. You know, the opportunity to see Tashia, Amber, Trayvon back on campus, you know, to do those announcements. But what was also great was the process to get to that. And we've kicked around jersey retirements probably for almost as long as I've been here. And I'm certainly supportive of it, but what I kept asking for was, we need a good process. Because each jersey that's hanging up there now, there was no process. And there's a story behind each one, how they got up there, and some have logic, some don't. But I said, we need to have a process that all of our alumni and fans can kind of stand behind. So that we finally got around to. That's a longer story than you'd ever want. But the bottom line is, I think we've got a good, what I would say, template and process in place now. And now the right names are behind those numbers that are going up there.
Yeah, I think, again, it's cool for them, especially having Amber, Tashia, Trayvon, like I said, and hopefully more here soon, to be able to see the appreciation that they have to say, hey, I was great when I was here, but now everybody will forever know that I was great up there. So it's been cool to see. But out of the jersey retirements into more, I guess, on the business side of things, recently, the Big East announced a new media rights agreement, and I think that's something that has been a really big talking point over the last few years. What's the Big East going to do? Is it going to be with Fox? Is it going to be with somebody else? But the way that you have talked about it, you seem pretty pleased with how it came together. Can you kind of speak to how it came together and your thoughts on it? You're
right, Paul. I think the media rights agreement for the Big East landed in a good place. And it comes down to not just exposure, but then a pretty healthy rights fee increase for the league going forward. The two words I keep coming back to on how it came about, it has to do with the partnership and the performance. The performance of our league, I think, speaks for itself, and the success that we've had in basketball over the first decade of the new Big East. But the partnership is distinctive and it's unique. You know, people forget that Fox and the new Big East, so to speak, essentially were formed together in some ways. FS1, you know, came out of the ground with the Big East. So we helped FS1 grow. And I think that same analogy will now be used going forward with Peacock. Because Peacock is the fastest growing sports related platform that's out there. And so again, it's already got, I think, about 40 million homes. So it's only going to continue to grow with NFL, with Olympics, the NBA's moving there. So again, I think we landed in a great place. Fox is still the main partner, and now we've added NBC going forward, and primarily through Peacock. And again, that's going to be a great partnership moving. We've got one more year in the existing deal, even though Peacock will start to make some appearances this year. But then long term, it'll be Fox and NBC. So there will be some games that'll be streaming only as they transition in, because Peacock is obviously a streaming platform. Yep. So did you feel like having a streaming only presence was important, just as we kind of get into the more modern age of streaming and cord cutting and everything else? Yes, and you know, it's hard to argue against the power of OTA networks, you know, over the air. CBS, ABC, NBC, and Fox, and we could sit here for 2 hours talking about that. I find it interesting. As a broadcasting nerd myself, a lot of eyes start to glaze over. But the power of those OTA networks is just hard to describe. But there's no doubt the future is streaming, and so how do you introduce it, and then how do you introduce it on the right platform, you know, for fans to be able to find, and so it's trying to balance that. There is a hard reality right now that the networks are paying more for content that goes on streaming than on the networks. because the reality is they're trying to build those. They're trying to build those platforms. So for us to turn down streaming at this point in time would have been, frankly, a financial hit to the conference. So it makes sense for streaming to get introduced at this point in time.
And last question on the streaming, would that be like where Olympic sports would go as well, or would that, okay.
Yes, although we actually have, again, not to get too nerdy, but we actually have a package that has yet to be sold that is primarily Olympic sports. So we are out on the market right now with that package. So I'm confident to say that our Olympic sports will probably end up on a streaming platform. Will it be Peacock? Will it be ESPN Plus? Will it be somebody else? Not certain yet. But where we landed with the main basketball package, because that's what has been kind of confirmed at this point. I still think it's probably the best college basketball TV deal in the country. It's with the right partners, and we still have the most OTA exposure of any league in the country.
Sure. Now, kind of joined with that, I think, is the one word that everybody always has that just click keyword in your mind is expansion.
Yep.
And does this new media rights deal set the Big East up to where you feel like you don't need to expand right now, or is expansion, and again, expansion would be adding another team or two, does that kind of enter your thought at all, or do you feel like, no, we're set for now?
We feel very set for right now. I mean, everybody's thrilled with the 11, the right schools, the right markets, and certainly the right brands, and it's a really solid group, as you well know. But with college athletics as fluid as it is right now, you kind of have to be assessing the marketplace as well. But the two are not tethered in any way. The media rights relationship with Fox does not mean, hey, add this team or add that school. So they are not connected in any way. But are we constantly having conversations around the possibility of expansion based on other situations around us? Yes, you're always trying to keep your head on a swivel. But to me, it keeps coming back to these two things anytime the conversation comes up. Does the institution fit? From either kind of, does it look like a Big East school, geography, some of that. So there's fit. And then there's finances. And I've used this description a lot, that at the end of the day, the pie that we have, NCAA money, Fox money, MSG money, those are probably the big three drivers. That pie ultimately gets added up and then distributed out to the 11 schools. So if you think about number 12 or 13 or 14, are they going to make the pie bigger? And if they aren't, that means all of us get a smaller piece of pie.
Yeah.
And that'd be a problem.
That would be a problem. Yeah, no doubt about it. And plus, for the nostalgia of it too, and for just the basketball competitiveness, the double round robin is something that's, it's so, as a basketball fan, you're starting to lose that in these bigger conferences that are expanding, and it's so important to the competitiveness of this conference.
It is, and also the fandom in some ways.
Yeah.
So it will be really interesting as the leagues get even larger, because you're right, the double round robin's been lost for several years in a lot of the power conferences. Now they're getting even larger.
Yeah.
And so how they construct their basketball schedules, especially, and their football schedules, in an equitable fashion, good luck.
Yeah. Here at Cintas, last couple of summers, Xavier's hosted a TBT regional last 2 years, but with the construction construction going on down there with the Center Court Club, some other things, just didn't work out this year. But a couple weeks ago, men's basketball team did have some fun with some alumni to practice here down in the new Clee Camp gym. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how fun it was to see the older players and the older generations come back to play this current team and to practice against them?
You were there, Paul. I mean, that was a fun night. That was a great night. Yeah.
I will say that there were donors there. There were some fans there. I will say, as somebody that has been around this program intimately for the last 9 or 10 years, that was maybe the coolest night of Xavier basketball that I can remember. Just the way that the players were able to interact with the fans, the older players, everything else. I can't remember a Xavier basketball event. And I'm somebody that's here. Like, sometimes you have to remind yourself that you're here almost every day. You see these players, you get to know them, you hear their stories and everything, but to see the fans be able to have that same interaction, that was one of the coolest events, and I genuinely mean it. I heard it from other people that I talked to after the night was done. That was one of the coolest things you all have ever done.
You know what? I can't top what you just said. I mean, I agree with everything you said, and you said it really well. The backdrop on it is it happened organically 2 years ago, almost kind of just at the last second. Our TBT team played our team, and Sean's first team, and in a scrimmage, and there was nobody in the gym. It was me and like 3 others, sitting off to the side. And to use your phrase, it was one of the coolest scrimmages, games, whatever you want to call it, I've seen, because it was just 40 minutes of up and down, a lot of woofing, and the atmosphere with no one in the gym was electric. And so we kind of filed it away, and I can't remember why it didn't work last year. But then heading into this year, we said, can we recreate that and get some fans there? So it was really a dinner, if you recall, a dinner event for our donors. It was an NIL fundraiser, and we had a group of people there. And again, I can't top how you described it. It was those 2 scrimmages have been some of the coolest events, basketball events that I've seen since I've been here, and just the reaction our fans had, and our former players, and then even this year's team, their reaction to all of that. It was a neat evening. Yeah,
and I think when you look at the players that were there, because an NCAA rule would say that you can't have your former team competing against players that aren't, or sorry, you can't have your current team competing against players that aren't alumni of the school.
Right.
So to fill out that TBT roster, because this year's Xavier Zip 'em Up TBT team had a lot of non-Xavier alumni on that team. So to fill it up, they had to bring some other guys back to the team. Justin Martin was there, James Farr was there, some guys that, it was just very interesting seeing all of these guys come back. And I thought it was extremely competitive.
It was.
I mean, it wasn't like they were just going out there and having some laughs. I mean, it was a very competitive game, and it was also the first chance really for us who have been around here throughout the summer to see the current team not competing against just themselves, right? And it was a cool night.
Yeah, I mean, the dinner was terrific because it allowed our fans to meet, talk, mingle with both the former players and the current players, and then to cap it off later with the 2 teams scrimmaging was something we hope to replicate in the future. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the TBT team and that future, whether it's still in Cincinnati, but somehow, some way, we got to bottle that up for the future.
Yep. Yeah. So before we transition to talking about the future of Xavier athletics and everything that entails, can you kind of update us on some big picture items that are going on around the department, and whether that includes adding new sports, sports that have just been added, lacrosse within the last couple of years, just what the big picture things are with the athletic department?
You're right, Paul. Lacrosse was added. So Meg's in her, I guess, finished her second season of playing, and she's been with us for 3 years. And then there was discussions about football in a very, not very public way, but a public way that got a lot of attention. And then there would have been a cascading effect had football been added with other women's sports to balance those from a Title IX standpoint. I don't want to say that idea is dead. It's still on the board out there as a possibility, but these were the realities that we faced. The program itself, that non-scholarship Pioneer League, makes sense on paper, but we don't have a place to play. Because Corcoran Field is now soccer and lacrosse and so forth. And it was going to cost somewhere between 20, 25 million to build even a Pioneer League facility. And the reality is Xavier's priority right now, rightly so, is the College of Medicine. And that's off to a great start. And so the bond issuance that we're about to put out needs to focus on the College of Medicine and getting that built. So at the end of the day, comm is more important than football for the university, and so that priority is moving forward. We'll see if we get to football down the road. The other factor that you can't deny has entered the reality just in the last 12 to 18 months is this completely disruptive period that we've got with college athletics. So you'd like to know, what's the landscape going to look like before you start adding sports at this point?
So I think one thing I was thinking about when I was putting this together and thinking about some things I wanted to ask you was when we got to this part of the show, I think one of the things that you see with these huge conferences now where you have UCLA and USC and Washington and Oregon joining the Big Ten and Stanford's in the ACC and these teams are flying thousands of miles across the country from each other is it might make sense for the bigger sports, right? For basketball or for football or whatever that might be. But when you get into the Olympic sports that don't have those budgets or just quite frankly are traveling more because they're playing more games or whatever it might be, do you kind of envision a potential where Olympic or non-revenue sports kind of transition to a more regional, like non-conference schedule in the sense of the way the conferences are expanding? Could it kind of impact conference scheduling in maybe the double round robin goes away in the some of the Olympic sports that do that? I don't know if that's been a discussion or
it has, and to me the short answer to your question, Paul, is yes. And how it develops, I'm not certain, but those conversations are taking place, and I think they're taking place almost in every league. So, like a lot of industries, I think you see swings, right? And so one of the swings over the next few years, I think could occur is your point of regionalization. Does it mean conferences maybe getting together in some sort of regional fashion with certain sports? That possibility has been discussed. We saw it with, I think you're aware, with Akron joining men's soccer for the Big East, and it allowed us to have 2 pods of 6. And you played everybody in your pod and then just a select number on the opposite. Could you see something like that? I think everything's on the table, but there's this realization that around resources that you touched on, and then the student-athlete experience. And I just think for these West Coast schools that are now flying east, I think you can do it in football. I think you can manage it. I think it's going to be tough in every other sport. I would argue that in every other sport, those West Coast schools that now have to consistently travel, it's a competitive disadvantage, and it's hard to argue otherwise.
Yeah. All right, let's talk basketball.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of optimism going into both the men's and the women's basketball teams this season. So can you kind of update us on where they are from your perspective?
Sure. I think you're right. The optimism's the right word to use there, Paul. I fully expect the women to take a step forward this year. It's hard to know what that step's supposed to look like until you can kind of see what's going on in the rest of the conference. But fair amount of turnover throughout the league. But there's no doubt that I think Billy believes, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but she's got the right people on the bus now, and the bus is headed in the right direction. So now it's about competitively taking a step forward. And clearly the men have been able to get their 2 best players back, on their 2 best recruits, so to speak, that were already here, back on the court. So yeah, you feel great about the front court, the back court, and then the front court now healthy and a little bit deeper. So I think undoubtedly that team is well positioned for at least to be in that mix again in the top half of the conference, which is your goal all the time: compete for the Big East championship and be in the mix for the NCAA tournament.
So the first time that fans will be able to see the men's basketball team publicly play against somebody else this year is going to be a little drive up the road.
That's right.
Up 75 to UD Arena. They're playing an exhibition against Dayton, and I think this is a phenomenal idea from Xavier's perspective, the way that this has all come together. It's for a great cause. For Dayton to be part of this charity exhibition that they're doing. Last year, Dayton played Ohio State in this game. This year, Xavier is playing Dayton in this game. It'll be on Sunday, October 20th. I am fired up for this one.
You going to be in there?
You would be hard-pressed to keep me out of that building.
Yeah. I think... first of all, the backdrop on the game, and you teed it up. This started last year with Anthony's commitment to suicide awareness, and they used the game to raise funds for suicide awareness with the game against Ohio State. This year he called Sean, and it took about 2 seconds for Sean to say yes to that, because not just the importance of the cause and the awareness around it, but let's face it, the relationship between Xavier and Dayton and what our players will face in that atmosphere. It only helps prepare you for the season. So you're right. Even though it won't count in the wins and losses, there's still going to be a lot on the line that day.
I think there will be a lot on the line for a lot of people on both sides, even though that game might not officially count. I just really think that these two teams haven't played each other since that Advocare Invitational Championship game back in 2015. It was a rivalry that meant so much to both programs, and as Xavier has gone their way in the Big East, and Dayton has obviously had success over the last few years. 2020, they had a team that was set up to be a #1 seed. So I think this will be a lot of fun to see those teams go against each other. One kind of question that I think I've gotten maybe more than anything else, and sometimes even I have a hard time answering it, and this is why I would love to hear your answer here, is what is, and you can answer this however you want, Greg.
Heck of a tee up.
What is the future of NIL, and where do we stand as Xavier Athletics? Where does Xavier Athletics stand in that NIL landscape?
That's easier to answer than the first part. I would say, first of all, there's no transparency. So anything I say, about where we stand is informed conjecture, I'll just say.
Okay.
But I will say confidently that we are very competitive NIL-wise as far as the kind of the total pot for our basketball program. Then where the future is, I have no clue. I have a sense there is going to be a fork in the road depending on what Judge Wilkin does with the kind of finalization of the House settlement. NIL could be brought in-house so that Xavier is running the NIL program versus the collective. And I will just say, for anybody that isn't aware of Final 2% and what a collective is and so forth, I think it's final2%.com. I would hope our fans would if you care about Xavier basketball, check in with Final 2%, because I know I speak for Sean and Billy in saying this. I don't think there's a more important part of our programs right now than having a competitive NIL program. And some of that's because we've got everything else in place. We've got a great facility. We've got a great university. We've got great coaches. We need to make sure that NIL is now an integral part of the program, and it's got to be successful. And I think we do it the right way. Our players are able to do service and work in the community, and then ultimately they're paid for that. Some of them have their own standing, endorsement deals and so forth. That's completely separate. But ultimately, where we are in NIL today, I think we're competitive, and you're always assessing the market and what the future may look like, trying to adjust to both the market and the rules.
So where would you say off of that we are with the possibility of student athletes becoming employees? Is that on the table?
Whole different conversation and podcast, right? For about 6 people to watch. But I'm fascinated by the whole, antitrust and what's the future of college athletics. But a lot of people just, again, eyes glaze over. I don't know is the short answer. I think some of that's in front of Congress right now on whether or not Congress, there's 2 paths. Is Congress going to get involved and at some point lay an antitrust protection over college athletics and essentially create a class of students? They are not students, they're not athletes, they are student athletes, and this is what it means. And Congress can do that. Or you've got 3 or 4 major employment-related court cases kind of marching forward in the federal court system and some state systems too. Sometime over the next 2 years, if one of those court cases goes a certain way, yes, then you're going to have all of the student athletes in the United States as employees and the various ramifications that go with that. That's 2 podcasts.
Do you get the sweats just thinking about all that?
No, I find it both incredibly exciting to be in college athletics at this moment and trying to navigate this, and at the same time, yeah, it's like, what are we doing, and what is the future, and attempting to navigate it. So, but those are the two basic paths, all kinds of tangents off of that. And I think sometime in the next 2 years, 18 months to 2 years, one of those two paths will probably emerge.
The Sean Miller Podcast is proud to partner with Deer Park Roofing, a company that's provided elite service for homes and businesses since 1996 and leads the industry in professionalism, quality, and responsiveness. Whether your needs are residential or commercial, like the outstanding work on the Cintas Center, the home of Xavier basketball, Deer Park can handle any job and ensure it's done right. Deer Park's motto is protect what's important, and what's important to you is important to Deer Park Roofing. Visit deerparkroofing.com. The Sean Miller Podcast is proud to partner with Payroll Partners, where you're not just a number. That means providing a best-in-class HR and payroll experience that was built on award-winning technology and live support customer service with a dedicated payroll specialist who's just a phone call away. You shouldn't have to choose between technology and customer service. At Payroll Partners, you get both. Payroll Partners is locally owned and operated by a proud Xavier alum. Visit payrollpartners.net. That's payrollpartners.net. Expansion. We talked about expansion to conferences. The one other expansion question I had for you was the NCAA tournament.
Oh, yeah.
That's something that has been talked about a ton. John Rothstein has been pleading for no expansion, as has a lot of fans. But I think there are definitely pathways for expansion that don't ruin the tournament as we know it right now, but also, you know, would gratify the people that want expansion. Is that something you have heard being, you know, talked about at a legitimate level? Like, because there's so many conflicting reports. Sure. That what does the NCAA tournament expansion look like?
I don't know. Here's the backdrop on it, and it started with, you know, I was a part of that transformation work that the NCAA did, and this is where it started, and the kind of the possibility of the tournament expanding, and you know, and it's not just basketball. Here was the backdrop. As we got into the transformation work, looking at all of Division I, there was a quick realization that there was just really wild inconsistency between all the sports and their NCAA tournament number of teams that were in the NCAA tournament. And you kind of stepped back and you started looking at it, and you realized you hold what we do up against, say, the pro leagues in America, where almost every pro league, essentially half the teams get into the playoffs. A 9-8 season for the Bengals, playoffs, that's success. Men's basketball and women's basketball, I mean, the standard's really high. You've heard me say this before. I mean, you got to be in the top 13% of Division I to get into the NCAA tournament as an at-large team. That's a lot different than 9-8, right? And so that led to this conversation of what is the right percentage, and we debated it, discussed it, arm wrestled, and came up with 25%. You know, if each sport, can you create a field that has roughly 25% of the schools making the postseason? And that's a key word, postseason, too. It may or may not be the NCAA tournament. Do you have secondary tournaments that also get you into the postseason? Because, you know, in college football, I mean, it's actually harder not to make a bowl game than it is to make a bowl game. I mean, literally more than 50%. So that's the backdrop. That was then given, the board endorsed that, and then that 25% goal was given to each sport committee. Can you make it work in your sport? And so the various sports are now, you know, trying to work it out, and then you start laying it over into basketball, and beyond, you know, the symmetry of an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that has the bracket, because I've heard that a few times. Is the reality that the basketball tournament is a made-for-TV event, right? Yeah. And it's sandwiched between conference tournaments that are a lot of money, and then the Masters, which is even more money. Yeah. And so there's a television window reality that's kind of immovable. So you've got that dynamic going on. And then ultimately you get to this point of is it going to expand or not? So that's where the conversation is now. I have no idea what white smoke will come out or when and so forth, but that's the context.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, I have 3 final topics here, kind of more bigger picture topics here for you before we let you go. And again, thanks for taking some time here to answer all this today. This has been great. But one thing that has been, I think, the biggest topic of discussion and everything with finances right now is this house settlement. And it's something that everybody is talking about, but can be confusing for a lot of people, including myself. How does this house settlement, how does it impact both Xavier, fellow Big East members, and with the budget challenges, where do we think that money will come from for that settlement?
So the house settlement is a class of former athletes, again, tied to the antitrust efforts going on around college athletics that are now going to be due payments starting this year, actually. And so it does impact the Big East and Xavier immediately. And so because our budgets were already set, all 11 schools, the Big East is going to handle the payment this year. So the Big East is in the middle of talking with us, each institution, and making reductions at the conference level to be able to handle the house payment for this year. Then for the next, I think it's 10 years, maybe the next 9 years, as far as making these payments, it's fortuitous that our new TV contract kicks in next year, because the payments that are due, the league payment, which is about $600,000 for the Big East, that's our share of it. The new TV contract with Fox will mitigate that. So we feel like we've got a strategy and a plan to be able to address and handle that.
Okay. And then here, the big topic that you had alluded to earlier is the new College of Osteopathic Medicine that's going to come out, It sounds like a podcast.
Yeah.
It's not a podcast. It is a college, and it will accept its first class in the fall of 2027, I believe. So you're still a few years away from that, but obviously laying the foundation for it, building a new building for it, everything going into this, such a huge initiative for this university. Can you just speak to how important this is, the success of it, or the hopeful success of it, what this means for the dynamic of the university and everything like that?
Well, I think it's great for Xavier on so many levels, Paul, and you alluded to some of them there. It came out of our strategic planning process as a program for the future, fits Xavier's mission, really fits a need with the shortage of physicians that's coming right down the pike here in the Midwest. So it fits Xavier on so many levels perfectly, and the plan itself is moving forward nicely. Fundraising's going well. Our dean is here, Dr. Steve Halm. He's doing a great job in building relationships in the region with healthcare systems. And then the building, which construction should start Thanksgiving, end of the year, somewhere in that range. But you'll start to see it not just be talked about, but actually see it coming out of the ground here soon.
Where will that building be physically here on campus?
So it'll be up on Dana, more or less, I would say, across from Listerman's, to give people a place marker, next to the College of Business. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. And then the last thing I had for you here today, Greg, and you can answer this however you want. How would you define success for Xavier Athletics over the next 5 years? With this landscape and everything else, what does success mean to Greg Christopher and Xavier Athletics?
Well, what it means to me is immaterial in that at the end of the day, I'm a steward of the department and trying to move it forward. So it's I say this often, but the programs are the university's programs, it's our alums programs. But I come back to, I guess, a couple of things, and it's the mission of the department and the board of trustees, carved this mission out. Shortly after I arrived, but it comes down to two things that you're trying to move forward. One is athletics is the front porch of campus. Not the most important thing Xavier does, but it is the most visible thing Xavier does. So you have to do it with that in mind and kind of that bar of excellence that you're trying to get to. So keep doing that. Then it's the student athletes experience themselves, and I know we take that very personally and literally. Parents are entrusting the lives of their daughters and their sons to us for those 330 student athletes. So the experience and the success they have, those are the obvious ones. And then I guess the other one that you can't, we talk about often, and I'd absolutely want to put this front and center, is one of the reasons I was attracted to Xavier is the history and the success of our 2 basketball programs. But yet haven't gotten to that 3rd weekend, you know, and so, you know, to help get Xavier to a Final Four and a national championship in those 2 flagship sports, I think helps drive everybody in this department.
San Antonio is a beautiful city, Greg.
Yes, it is.
It's a beautiful city.
I'll take any city that has a Final Four at this point.
Well, Greg, we appreciate you coming on today.
Thank you, Paul.
For this episode of the Sean Miller Podcast. Making your debut. We appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody for watching this episode of the Sean Miller Podcast. Like I said, Adam will be back from his golf trip, and he'll be on here soon. So we appreciate that. Adam, I hope you went low today, Adam. Whatever you did, I hope your score was low. And also Coach Miller, I should say, will be back as well. But this has been another episode of the Sean Miller Podcast. I want to thank Greg and everybody else here, our video editor, producer extraordinaire, Josh Semsrott behind the camera. This has been presented by Deer Park Roofing and the official payroll sponsor of the Sean Miller Podcast, Payroll Partners. We will see you next time on the Sean Miller Podcast.
This has been the Sean Miller Podcast, presented by Deer Park Roofing, with your hosts, Paul Fritschner and Adam Baum. Join us again soon for another episode with the head coach of the Xavier Musketeers, Sean Miller.